Okay, thank you so much for waiting. Hello and welcome to Where the Heck Are You? Employment and Tax Implications Arising from Remote Employees, hosted by Dean Dorton and Stites and Harbison. Presenting today is Shannon Antle Hamilton from Stites and Harbison and Erica Horn from Dean Dorton. Shannon Antle Hamilton is a partner with Stites and Harbison and the chair of the firm's Employment Law Service Group. She is a seasoned litigator and counselor on complex employment law issues. Shannon provides a compliance counseling to clients in all areas of employment law, and for the last year and a half has become well-versed in helping businesses with COVID-19 employment-related issues. Shannon has a significant lead counsel experience in employment litigation and has tried numerous cases in both federal and state court to jury verdicts. Honored by Best Lawyers in America, Chambers USA, Kentucky Super Lawyers, and Martindale Hubbell as AV preeminent, Shannon received both her JD and undergraduate degree in accounting from the University of Louisville. Erica Horn is a tax associate director at Dean Dorton. She has over 30 years of professional experience. She has spent the majority of her career advising clients on state and local tax issues. She has represented Kentucky and multinational companies in tax controversies before the Kentucky Department of Revenue, Kentucky Board of Tax Appeals, and the state and federal courts of the Commonwealth. Through her advice and advocacy, Erica has saved her clients millions of dollars in Kentucky taxes. Erica has experience in a wide range of industries, including construction, equine, manufacturing, warehousing, and distribution, and is a prolific speaker and author on state and local tax topics. She was even named the 2019 State Tax Author of the Year, Direct Taxes by Bloomberg Tax and Accounting. Now, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the chat feature at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We will be monitoring it throughout the presentation, and we'll make sure to share any technical questions with our presenters at the end. We do not address your question during today's presentation. Contact information is included at the end of the materials, so please reach out after as needed. This session is for 1 hour of CPE and CLE credit. In order to get that full hour, there will be polling questions throughout the presentation. Please open a browser and go to pollev, so that's pollev.com/Dean Dorton. Enter your first and last name in order to receive credit. Your answers are still anonymous on screen, and you are not signing up for an account. You are simply providing a way for us to tie responses to your attendance for each credit. You can also text 22333, enter the message Dean Dorton. Remember, that's one word, DEAN, DORTON, and then you'll text A, B, C, so on and so forth to respond to each question. Each polling question has a 60-second limit. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to you by the end of this week. Thank you so much for joining us today, and do not hesitate to ask questions. Without further ado, I give you Erica Horn.
Good. It's still morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to leave this slide up for a couple more, well, I'm not going to say a couple seconds. I can hear my granddaughter counting 1001, 1002 in the background, but for a few more seconds so that you have time, because the very first thing that you're going to do is vote in a poll. That's the next slide. I am also going to do the incredibly tacky yet necessary quit sharing my screen so I can turn off my email so you don't hear the crazy ding throughout the presentation. So hang on, folks. I'm very sorry about that. Go away. All right, now get back to business. See, that just gave you more time to work on getting set up here. All right, let's see how you did in getting set up. So, oh, you've been voting while I was away. So here's our first question. My workforce is 100% in a single state. You're already sprinkled across several states. A few of you are 100% remote. You know, we might be surprised where our employees are. I have no idea where the heck my employees are. I'm not sure what none of the above would be, so I'm glad y'all didn't choose that. very interesting, Shannon. We've got multi-state employers in our midst. Hey, Julia, how do I know when the 60 seconds is up?
You have 10 more seconds.
Thanks.
Good that we have people sprinkled across several states, since that's what we're talking about. So that's good.
You know, I have had instances where I've done a polling question and found out that I was not set up for my audience. So then you just kind of pivot. Thank you all again for joining us. As you can see, most, small difference between 38 and 50, have employees in multiple states. And then a good portion of you have them in a single state, and a few 100% remote. I have no idea where they are. I know we talked yesterday, and someone had just found out that one of its employees had moved to Iowa, unbeknownst to them. So, okay, Shannon, what about this question?
Okay, so prior to the pandemic, we want to know, did you have 0 employees working remotely? Some employees working remotely based on their job duties. So for example, someone that does outside sales. You had a flexible environment where employees, regardless of their job duties, could choose to work in the office or remotely. The majority of the employees worked remotely, and all employees worked remotely. So there are, I know from our own experience and some of my clients' experience, we've never had people working remotely. And then the pandemic came, and suddenly on March 13th, boom, there you go, everybody's going to be working from home. So we wanted to know that prior to the pandemic mandates that we social distance or go home for a while, what arrangements did you have with your employees? And it looks like
Yeah, so
interesting. Yeah.
Somewhat similar to our to the answers to our first slide.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways Shannon and I practiced law together for over 20 years, and we're law partners. And then I moved out of law and into public accounting. One of the ways public accounting firms are different than law firms is there are and have been remote employees for a while. Not as many as there are now, of course. But yeah, that was unheard of in the law firm until this. All right. So Shannon, as we get into the nitty gritty, as they say, we're going to be talking about federal and state law today. What kind of law controls employment law?
Well, it depends, which is a lawyer's favorite question or answer, right? It depends. Every employer in the United States has to follow the federal laws that govern and the employment relationship. But what happens with the state laws is sometimes the states may or may not have a similar statute to the federal statute. So let's say, for example, Title VII. Title VII, federal law, everybody that has a certain number of employees has to follow that. And perhaps you're in a state, though, that the state does not have a Civil Rights Act, but only follows that federal law. Then let's say wage and hour. Yes, you have to follow the federal law, but in Kentucky, there are a number of wage and hour statutes that are not addressed in the federal Fair Labor Standards Act, such as giving breaks, lunches, when you have to pay someone after they're terminated. And so although it says what controls, they both control, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that there are differences. They're not all the same, and not all the states are the same. What about the tax laws, Erica?
Yeah, well, you hit on it. Not all the states are the same. That's why people don't like me very much because I complicate things. Uh, because unlike the federal government, which is one giant uh, body of law that controls your federal income tax, federal tobacco taxes, if you're in telecommunications, federal telecommunications taxes. Um, States, they have sales and use taxes. They make that up all by themselves. They have property taxes. They make that up all by themselves. Uh, for income tax, which is going to be what we primarily dwell on today, most states start with federal and then they go all different directions. So uh, there's not nearly as much federal intervention among the states, and just saying that word, you know why, or those words, you know why, as there is probably at the employment law level. So Shannon, the one thing they taught us in law school that we still remember is that words mean everything, and every word is special. Uh, and so I thought maybe we should talk about what our words mean. And I've been confused all along about whether or not telecommuting or working remotely are the same thing or different things.
Great question. Actually, telecommuting and working remotely are the same things. It's really more of a time frame when people were first beginning to work from home or in another location. And I want to say home just because that's where most people's remote offices are. The primary mode of communication was the telephone. Maybe you had the ability to sign into a computer system. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you could exchange emails, but you couldn't go on. The document system unless you had a what's that thing called where you put the the
Like that.
yeah.
The audience knows what that is. I don't.
I do too. I'll remember in a second, but a modem. You had to
A modem.
your modem. You had to hook your phone up to your modem, your rotary phone up to your modem in order to get into the system. Now, and so that's where telecommuting came in. So now, we don't need the telephone. We could actually all work remotely just using the software in our computers that is hooked up to our employers and the company's systems. So they're basically the same thing. And so one of the things you'll see today for sure is we're trying to transition a little bit from that telecommuting to working remotely just to kind of bring it into the 21st century.
Here we go. So the other thing that I thought was important is that we understand what we mean by a remote employee. And so we decided upon an individual working away from their home room. And the way I came up with homeroom, Shannon, was I just had this flash of, what you call the home state or the main state or the basic state or the employer state. I had this flash of cupcakes from when you were in elementary school and you had a homeroom mom or dad and they brought cupcakes. So I used homeroom. And we define homeroom as the location or perhaps locations, because most of you have employees in multiple states, to which that employee primarily reports, or their principal place of business. You'll see various terms or hear various terms that all point to that homeroom. So Shannon, all that being said, having our foundation, knowing a little bit about our audience and what words mean, do you want to talk about the employment implications arising from remote employees?
I do. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to grab the slides, so I'm just going to ask you to change the slides, and if that changes and I can start changing the slides, I'll let you know.
All right, that works.
Okay, so employment implications arising from employees that are working remotely. So the question, when Erica contacted me and said, hey, do you want to do this seminar with me? And or this webinar with me, I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that. And so the question was, how do employment law, how does compliance obligation change when the employee works remotely? And really, at the end of the day, they don't change as much as you have to make sure, you have to continue to make sure you are, as I said, applying, and Erica said, applying both the federal and the state law requirements, as well as making sure that you are consistently applying those standards across the board. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So, like I said, the employment law obligations still are there. You can't discriminate. You can't treat people differently. You've got to pay people overtime. All of those things are still required, but it changes some as you are moving more and more people to working remotely, as well as perhaps in different states, or that employee that disappears into Iowa. So as workplaces begin to reopen, what we're talking about is, whether there's pros and cons. So we had the people that were before the pandemic that had some people were remote and some people were not. We're hearing a lot in the media about employees not wanting to come back to the office, not just because of pandemic issues, but because they've gotten used to it. They like it. They feel more productive. They don't want to drive 2 hours in their Atlantic traffic. So, what we're doing is looking at employers that are evaluating those pros and cons. And so, some of the pros that have been discussed are, the continued expansion of your recruiting base. We have had several several clients lose employees, very valuable employees, because a firm in California called and said, hey, we want you to work for us. You can stay at home and we're going to pay you 3 times the salary you're currently making.
Wow.
I don't know. I think that's probably smart to do that. So regardless of loyalty. So you got that kind of pro. If you can do that and you can pull those resources away from other people, that would be great. You have the potential retention of employees. Of course, as I said, people want to stay working remotely, and you may say, no, can't do, no, can do. And then you have the additional cost and expense savings tool. If you don't have the bricks and mortar to pay for in leasing, then that's a great incentive to consider in terms of the allowing employees to work remotely post-pandemic.
Yeah, so, I'm curious, Shannon, about what we're going to see in the commercial real estate market as employers downsize their bricks and mortar presence. That's going to be a long-term ramification that's going to take a bit.
Yeah, and in Louisville, we already had a ton of excess office space, so I'm not sure who's going to be filling these up, if anybody. So you're right; it's going to be there's going to be a change in that market, and we're going to have to see how that shakes out. So the cons of remote work is, of course, we've got the multi-state legal compliance issues. So, okay, not all payroll requirements are the same. The unemployment benefits may be different, or the standards for receiving that. Some states may require certain types of leave of absences that the federal laws don't require. So you've got to make sure that depending where you are, what other states you're in, you're having to go back and constantly look at those, unless you have somebody that you've got that's in charge of monitoring those things. One of the challenges is consistently applying the policies and procedures. So what we have found with our clients during this time is that there was a little bit of, hey, we're gonna show people some grace, which is a great thing, and allow some some coloring outside of the lines. But in terms of coming back post-pandemic, we're going to, one of the cons is trying to pull people back in to, hey, we have policies and procedures you need to follow, even if you are in a remote location. Other things, measuring productivity. Literally, we have clients who say, absolutely not. We are not going to go remote because we cannot measure productivity. We have some that are half and half that say, we'll let you work remotely unless your productivity drops. And how do you measure that? And then we have some that say, yeah, we're measuring productivity because we've got software that monitors you. So, and then that rolls into the privacy and data security. So there's lots of cons in terms of managing that type of workforce, as well as individuals within that workforce. So we're talking about the type of geographic location-based laws just real quickly. So you have the resident law, which is obviously where the employee's resident or home is. If it's a different state where they're working remotely, the work location is the state law of the employer's office and workspace or main space. And then for the reporting law location is the law of the employer's location or workplace to which the employee reports. So for example, on that last one, you've got, let's say you've got, you have a business that's headquartered in Michigan. You have a remote employee who has an office and they in a different state, but they report to someone that is located in Kentucky. Their supervisor is in their office in Kentucky, but the employee, because their region is the Southeast United States, they live in North Carolina. So where do we go here? What do we do? So those are the kind of things we're seeing, and having to pull each of these state laws, look at the federal laws, and decide, okay, how do we make sure our clients are complying with all of those requirements?
You're going to make the tax stuff look easy. Congratulations.
Good. I don't believe that for a minute. So, all right. So the remote employees in the application of law, they're generally subject to laws of the state and localities where they are located. There are some, though, that, as I said, you have to balance the requirements of the state and the federal. So, for example, let's say you have an employee that is located in Indiana and they're working from home in Kentucky. So Indiana doesn't have a additional family leave act other than for military leave. So Indiana law would follow the Fair Labor Standards or the FMLA. So, you know, there's requirements for those, but let's say the employee doesn't fulfill one of those requirements. And so you're thinking, okay, well, great. This pregnant employee has now asked to go on a leave of absence or to only work part-time when they're already working remotely. I don't think we have to do that. Well, the problem is the employee is working in Kentucky, and under the Kentucky Pregnant Workers Act, a potential accommodation for a pregnant worker is adjusting their schedule, and there's no requirement in terms of how long an employee works, where they're located, whether they're within 75 miles of other people. So that's where, again, the challenge comes in with these remote employees that are working in different states. So you just have to make sure you know what your state law is. And if you need legal counsel to help you shake that out, please feel free to call us or whoever your legal counsel is, because that's very important. So the pandemic, of course, created this immediate need for employees to leave the workplace and perform remotely. And some employers already had the telecommuting policies, and they were used to working with those types of employees, but others did not. And so for the first 30 days in March, me and my crew were creating remote policies for employers that didn't have that. And so, you know, at that point, again, we were all kind of in survival mode. Let's do the basics, let's do the minimums, and if we need to change things later on, we will. So if you're an employer now who is reviewing and trying to decide whether or not to allow employees to continue to work remotely, pull out those old telecommunicating or teleconferencing policies and work on say, okay, do we need to update these, or do we need, if you don't have one, please go ahead and let's start drafting those now. So your working remote policy, you have two different issues. You have a policy that tells employees who are eligible to work remotely, and then you also have an agreement with the employee to talk about how that arrangement's going to work. So the working remotely policy needs to reiterate that this arrangement is not necessarily a company-wide benefit. It is for the is for the employee. It's for the company's business, not for the employee. That it may be appropriate for some employees, but not in positions and not for others, because as we know, every other employee who is not allowed to work remotely, they all know the ones that do work remotely, and they don't understand why they can't. And that's always going to be a managerial balance you're going to have to deal with. And then some employers, in terms of policy, require employees to work actually on location for at least 12 months in in a satisfactory manner, because they want to be able to lay eyes on them, make sure the employee has the work ethic, ensure that the team building has occurred, and use the remote working option as a potential carrot. And as I said, the reason for that is a lot of people want, and employees need to be trained on products or the culture of the company. They need to develop relationships with individuals that they're going to report to or they're going to work with. And let's face it, it's just easier. It's easier to do when you're on site and in person. So I think that is a requirement. They may be a little more difficult now, particularly with the newer Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y generation, who, they've lived on their computers all their life. They feel close to people that they haven't met before because they've seen a picture of them and they've Instagrammed them forever. But that's a different issue. So in terms of that's your policy. So in addition to whether the employee is suitable for this arrangement, you have the job responsibilities. You need to look at the equipment needs. Is there a regular workspace that may be different from where the employee worked during the pandemic? Mine was the dining room table. The ability to monitor productivity of the remote employees and the ability to discipline if necessary. So just quickly with the equipment, you have they need to determine what equipment do you need. Is the equipment supplied by the business? Yes, it likely will be, and it needs to be maintained by the business. The company needs to, if they're going to allow the individual to use their own device, take no responsibility for the damages or repair. The equipment is to be used for only company purposes, so you don't want Junior to go in and play Minecraft on the company's computer all night. That understanding should be included in your agreement, and there should be a policy that says in that agreement that upon termination of employment, the company will receive all of their property back. And people are like, well, in our employee handbook, it says that people are going to return that equipment when they leave. So we'll just send that to them and tell them that they have to give it back. And that's great if they give it back. But the next question is, okay, what if they don't? Well, we've spent a lot of time saying that the employee handbook is not a contract and that nothing in there is a contract. So it is difficult to go to the court and say, hey, we've got to breach a contract based on the policy that we've said that it shouldn't be a contract. So I suggest that if you've got a lot of equipment and you have a concern about possible return, that you include that in the agreement, so the employee has a separate document that says, okay, we're going to do this. So equipment, who pays for it? I don't want to pay for all of the internet, high-speed internet that somebody's going to need. And so in terms of those types of answers, there is the state-specific question, and then there's the federal-specific question. So this next slide, Erica. And so, for example, in Kentucky, there's no law that prohibits an employer from requiring employees to purchase uniforms or tools or equipment necessary to do their jobs. However, under federal law, take a look at fact sheet number 16 and deduction from wages for uniforms and other facilities under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And basically, the examples they give is that if the wearing of a uniform is required by law, the nature of the business, or the employer, the cost and maintenance of the uniform is considered to be a business expense of the employer. Now, you can require the employee at times to bear that cost, but what they're going to do is the feds are going to look at whether or not when you take those deductions, does it reduce the employee's wages? I'm assuming this is a non-exempt employee, below the minimum wage. You can't do that. And so the question will be, well, how do I do that? Do I have the administrative bandwidth to do that, right? In terms of exempt employees under federal law, employers are prohibited from making any kind of deductions from an employee's salary for uniforms and tools and equipment. So, you know, you got to be really careful about that particular issue in terms of should we pay, should we not pay, and particularly with things like the phone, the internet, additional printers, whatever that the employee may not have at their home. So make sure that you're looking at that, and before you require the employee to pay for it, not only is it legal, but also ensuring that administratively your people can continue to monitor that so that none of the laws will be broken. So then we talk about security. As I said, I'm sure my dining room table was very secure during the pandemic. I did have my little dog, guard dog, in case somebody came by, but you know, how will the remote working employee protect the company's proprietary business information and customer information? So, you know, what about at night? Do they just leave everything on their desk like they do in the office, or do they pack it up and put it in a locked file? Is there regular password maintenance? Is there double security verification? Do you need a separate confidentiality agreement? Because again, a lot of employers rely on their confidential information policy, which is great when they're employees, but what about when they quit or when they're terminated? You know, do you have a separate confidentiality agreement if those individuals have taken proprietary business information or customer information home? So those things need to be considered. They also need to be addressed in any type of working agreement, remote working agreement, and each business or industry is going to be different. So safety, you know, here's I can't even get employers sometimes to admit that they have an employee that actually got hurt on their property, let alone. You know, the first thing I would do if you're considering this is I would contact your workers' compensation carrier and confirm whether they have any, number one, additional online resources to help you put together your safety requirements for your employees. And they can help confirm whether there's any state-specific requirements. You might want to have those, you know, vetted by your legal counsel, but at least the carrier can give you a heads up. And some of the carriers may have some kind of restrictions and may have some kind of requirements. So you need to know those as you're putting together your agreement. Most employers pre-pandemic require remotely working employees to maintain their house work state in a safe manner, free from hazards, and obviously if they're injured at home, they have to notify the employer immediately. Some employers did audits. They would have someone from operations go in and take a look at the setup, make sure that it is safe and that it was clean, free from safety hazard, et cetera. And so that's something you're going to need to think about, because again, people have gotten awfully used to sitting at their kitchen table and doing their work.
Hey, Shannon, we've got about 25 minutes left, so just let me know where you want to go.
Okay, let's go to, we talked about the top, let's do productivity issues just real quick. How does the company deal with productivity issues? I noted that said a recent Los Angeles Times article talked about the various methods, the various softwares that an employer can use to monitor their employees' productivity while they're working remotely. I suggest that if you do any of these things, and there's another couple on the next page, Erica, that you notify your employees that you have this software and that you will be utilizing it. And it's not necessarily because that you legally need to do it, But if there is an issue, they're going to say, hey, I was at home, I had an expectation of privacy, and I really didn't want that webcam on me. So let's make sure that the employees know that before.
I thought those slides were really scary, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, it is scary. So then finally, how do you monitor employee engagement if you're not going to go the route of the software? Well, is the remotely working employee joining meetings on time? Can you find them? Do they respond in a reasonable amount of time? Are they keeping up with timelines for turning in projects? And really, your best source of a non-productive employee is likely other employees complaining about them and them not doing their job and their unavailability. So there are different things that you can do, but it goes back to, as I was saying, make sure that you're treating each of these folks consistently with other folks that are offsite. So I know that we're getting close on time, and so Erica, do you have any questions?
I was just wondering about this question, this polling question we have. So if you haven't signed up, pollev.com and then Dean Dorton, or text 222-22323 to Dean, and then put Dean Dorton in the body. But looks like you're doing okay to me. Require all employees to return to the office, go back to the status quo, but have some employees working remotely. Allow employees who are not working remotely before to continue if they ask, which I thought was probably important. Require employees to continue working remotely because you found out they can and they're productive, perhaps even more productive. And you can cut out some rent costs and some of the other things you said, assuming you don't have those safety and privacy concerns. By the way, Dean Dorton, I'm not sure my workplace is safe. And then create a hybrid classification, which looks like what most people are thinking about, where some people will be, where you come to the office sometime and you work remotely sometime. So some way of maintaining that collegiality. Is that what you're thinking, Shannon?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, like I said, I think you make the whole tax thing easier because that employment law thing. No wonder you've been busy, girlfriend. We're going to talk. What's the problem? I don't have to tell you all what the myriad of problems are with the pandemic and the things that have come with it. Sometimes some of our payroll especially operates automatically and we don't think about it a lot. So we're going to talk about income tax withholding, something called the convenience of the employer rule, which is a Northeast thing for the most part, for those of you in the Northeast, and I know there are a few of you. So we're going to briefly, if we have time, just talk about COVID-19 measures. Stop, that's mine. The states are very jealous. They don't like to share money with each other. So we're going to talk seconds about litigation and then other things that folks working remotely, other state and local tax issues that they can create. So a couple more words, non-resident, which you might already know what that means, but it's one day more than half the number of days in the year. I really hope it's 183. I didn't do the math. I'm sure somebody will tell me if it's wrong. So if I worked in Indiana one more day than half of the days in the year, I'd be an Indiana resident suddenly, even if the other 182 days I worked in Kentucky. And then the idea of work days, we'll talk about days spent in state on company business. So one of the biggest issues that came up early is, what do I do about income tax withholdings? So basically, the general rule, it makes sense. This might be the only thing, you guys, that makes sense in all of state and local tax. The state that you live in has a right to tax all of your income. The state where you work or earn income, they get to tax you too. That's not the part that I thought really made sense. I'll come back to that. You know, as an employer, that you're obligated to withhold and remit state income taxes on the compensation of your employees. There are reciprocity agreements and credits for taxes paid to other states. That's just like it sounds. If I were working half the time in Indiana because of a reciprocity agreement, what in the world is that? It's an agreement between Indiana and Kentucky where Indiana says, hey, and Kentucky says, hey, Indiana residents, don't worry about the Kentucky income tax on wages, salaries, or commissions. And Indiana says, Kentucky residents, don't worry about income tax on wages, salaries, and commissions. You just pay it all to Kentucky, or you pay it all to Indiana, and we'll all live happily ever after. Kentucky has that type of an agreement with 5 of our contiguous states. So we have 7 contiguous states, but for bonus, we have Michigan and Wisconsin. I don't have any idea how Michigan and Wisconsin got in the picture. These agreements with these states date back to the mid-1960s, which I thought was fascinating. Ohio has a very ornery rule. Ohio residents are exempt from salaries and wages unless it's an S corporation shareholder employee who owns more than 20% of the company. So these agreements, they're called reciprocal because they go both ways. So that's what Kentucky would do. That's what Ohio would do. They do the same things. In practice, this is what I meant. Looks like it makes sense. Most states use physical presence to determine withholding obligations. So you withhold where you are. If your employee lives and works in Kentucky, like about 40% of your alls do, you withhold Kentucky income tax. The most interesting question for you is, what about the local occupational license tax? What if they live in the next county or 2 counties over? If your employee lives in Kentucky and works in Indiana, you withhold Kentucky because we have a reciprocity agreement. Indiana says, oh yeah, just pay Kentucky. That's my son-in-law who's an architect and works in Indiana. And then what happens if there's no reciprocity agreement? We don't have a reciprocity agreement with Missouri. Why not? I do not know why not. I think that's fascinating. So for non-resident or remote employees, you would generally, back to that common sense physical presence rule, withhold in proportion to where they're spending their time. So if a Kentucky resident works 50% of the time in Kentucky and 50% of the time in Missouri, then Kentucky law allows you to withhold 50% Kentucky, even though you owe on 100% of your income. And Missouri, at that link down there, has a little formula, a little 3-part formula that you use to learn that you withhold 50% of their income for the 50% of the time that they spend in Missouri. What keeps your employee from owing Kentucky a bunch of money when you've only withheld 50% and Kentucky gets to tax 100%? That's that tax credit that we were talking about. So when your employee does their tax return, they come to the bottom and it says total taxes owed to Kentucky. The next line is taxes paid to other states. That goes in as a minus. So if I owed Kentucky 100 and I paid Missouri 50, then I owe Kentucky 50. You withheld 50. Bingo. We're home free. So that's what happens in the majority of cases where there's not reciprocity. Now, I went through that quickly. It's not as simple as it, perhaps for you all it is as simple as it sounds. I had to think about it some. But then there are these states that muck everything up by having something called the convenience of the employer rule. So as you can see, I just listed 3 of the 5 or 6 states, New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Their rule is if you're working at home, and the pandemic messed everything up, right? So if you're working at home for your own convenience, you don't want to make that commute. You don't want to get out of your pajamas that day. You don't want to put on makeup, whatever it is. If you're working at home, your kid's sick, quite legit, right? You're working at home for your convenience. New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, they don't care. They're going to pretend as if you are working in New York, Pennsylvania, or Delaware, or one of the other states that has the rule. The rules, of course, I told you states are all different. There are variants of this rule, but this is the general rule. So what, Erica? What's the big deal? Because you told me that you get a credit for taxes paid to other states, so it should be okay, right? Well, no, and I'll tell you why by way of this example. So let's assume Tim, and there really is a Tim, and he really is a New York resident, and he usually works in New York City. But when everything got shut down last March, he went to his Colorado ski home. I also saw an example where somebody spent 2 weeks at their 2 months at their vacation home, 2 months at their in-laws, 2 months something else. I was like, oh my gosh. That really makes you question whether or not you can have remote working policies, Shannon. He intended to return to New York City before now. Who knows? I mean, here we are. We're still stuck with yet perhaps another ugly variant coming along. He's still not back in his office. The real Tim, however, did not go to his Colorado ski home. So what happens? Tim's a New York resident. We think, actually, is he a New York resident? We'd have to look at New York law and see what New York thinks about that, because the laws are specific on what constitutes residency. The general rules, that number of days I gave you. Colorado, because he's working there, demands Colorado withholding, which to me, and New York, because of their convenience of the employer rule, if it applies in a pandemic, demands New York taxes, which that's what caused me to ask whether or not you could work more than 365 days a year. So if are you working 2 days when you're working the same day in Colorado and New York? Just curious. Well, what happens here in terms of that credit is that New York doesn't think you're entitled to a credit because they don't recognize that you've been working in Colorado. They think you've been working in New York all along. So they don't care that you pay tax to Colorado. As far as they know, or as far as they're willing to know, right? They have you clocked in New York, and you're going to pay New York taxes. There have been there's a lot of rumbles about these convenience of the employer rules and whether or not they're lawful, constitutional, actually. Isn't that an infringement on your personal right? I saw one case, Shannon, where the plaintiff's lawyer argued that it was an unreasonable search and seizure of property. I was like, that's terrific. A state tax case that's not property, that's an unreasonable taking of property. I love that. So that's an issue.
So far, you're not convincing me that tax is easier.
Are easier? Oh, come on.
You're not convincing me of that. I don't know anybody else, but not me.
COVID, the states took, I think, really 4 approaches, but it says 3. I said 3. Silence. I hate it when they do that. The only people who hate it more than I do when they're silent is you, because that leaves you absolutely up in the air with nowhere to go, just trying to guess what some tax administrator is going to say the answer is later down the road. They issued a statement saying, we're just following our regular rules. There's no pandemic or remote working here. Just keep on keeping on. or they adopted temporary rules. And some groups that did got in a bunch of trouble. The temporary rules were temporary. Some of them had actual hard stop dates, and those with hard stop dates, like September 30th, 2021, all of those hard stop dates have expired. Some of them had dates when the government's order of an emergency is lifted. Which government? State government, federal government, local government, which tax? So those are up in the air. Well, all right. So here's a question for you, for purposes of your CPE CLE, if you care. If you were making New York's law, that convenience of the employer law, what would you? I knew you were all going to say that. Abolish the income tax. I started to not even put that in there. Require employers to withhold. What about unemployment tax and local occupational taxes? I'm coming. Require employers to withhold New York taxes, regardless of their whereabouts. Stay with the rule. Do the reasonable thing, people. Look at where the person is and act accordingly. Oh, come on, guys. None of you want to play revenue trivia with me, or revenue roulette? That's what I was looking for. Require the taxpayer to send in an estimate of what New York will lose if they don't get your taxes, and then New York will let you know. I am really disappointed. That was my favorite answer. It makes sense that people would think that the common sense answer is correct. Okay, because of the local thing, let me just tell you this. Ohio passed a law that said, we're just going to pretend like the pandemic's not happening and you have to pay the local city where you are. Dr. Morrissey lives in Pennsylvania, and she commuted, flew to Cleveland on Monday morning, flew home on Friday night. And then at the end of the year, she would file a refund claim if it turned out that she wasn't in the city of Cleveland. That is ongoing. There's similar legislation in St. Louis. We'll have to talk about New Hampshire and Massachusetts, or just Google it, New Hampshire versus Massachusetts, and you'll find out New Hampshire doesn't have an income tax. Massachusetts wants people who used to work there before the pandemic to pay Massachusetts, and New Hampshire thinks that's wrong, which is where the "stop, that's mine" title came from. Now, about those locals, the question popped up, Shannon, you probably couldn't see it. So one part of the question was Indiana, and I don't know what Indiana has done. For employers starting out, the two of the largest Kentucky municipalities, Louisville and Lexington, said Lexington said, just keep withholding here unless this is not going, as long as this is temporary. Well, what constitutes temporary? Louisville said, just pretend like they're here. Well, as employers at the very beginning of the pandemic, that's what we wanted to hear, because we didn't want to have to try to figure out how to change everything. If Louisville remains with, as long as your employer is based in Louisville, you're going to withhold Louisville. Your remedy is at the employee level. The employee, because trust me, you're not going to convince Metro Louisville to change the rule. The employee can file a refund claim for the days they worked outside of Louisville. Now, you have to sign off on that refund claim. Actually, you have to provide some sort of documentation.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Erica. How do you prove that you were somewhere else?
So, Shannon, I had a client call, and their HR department had been providing a spreadsheet for the employees that traveled a lot, telling them when they were outside of their primary jurisdiction, their homeroom. And then I got the call because they got a notice from a different county that said, we see where your employees got a refund from, let's just say, Fayette County, and they said that they were working in my county. So please pay their withholding taxes, please pay their occupational license fee to my county. And that was when that employer, the tax group, found out that the Human Resources Department was giving them spreadsheets that showed their time. So for all of you
I
that,
think we need the GPS on the security, the productivity security software added, so we can, run a report. I think
so it's the whole thing that we put the reason we called it what the presentation, what we did in terms of where the heck are my employees? And how do I know if they're in Bath County or Fayette County, or if they're in Iowa or San Francisco? So you want to sync that that relationship between your HR department and your tax department. The other question that it raises is, do you educate? How do you educate? What do you tell your workforce? So in the case of Louisville, do you say to your workforce, hey guys, we have to withhold Louisville? You can file a refund claim for the days that you're not working in Louisville. You have to have good supporting documentation for that. But if you do that, then you need to know that the county in which you are working is going to get the information about that refund claim from Jefferson County. And we, your employer, may get a notice saying, oh, you had employees in Bath County, please pay the Bath County tax. I don't even know if Bath County has the tax, but I just use that as an example. Shannon, I'm not expecting you to answer this on the spot. Oh, we've got 3 minutes, sorry. But it's curious to me.
We do have quite a few questions, Erica.
Okay. It's curious to me whether an employer could say, and if we get one of those notices and we have to pay the tax, it'll come out of your next check. So you'll have to discuss that, you all, with your employment lawyer. Quickly, one comment. You could end up having reporting and filing obligations in states other than Kentucky if you have employees in states other than Kentucky. Well, you could have a sales and use tax obligation, you could have an income tax obligation, you could have a franchise tax obligation. End of lecture. Pass me the aspirin. You said there were questions, Julia?
I did. Let's go with the first one. Is there a requirement to provide employment law posters to the remote employees working from home?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I saw that pop up and I was thinking, do they? I think actually it would be a good idea to provide those to them. Obviously, you don't have to do it in poster form, but you could, as part of their setting up their home office as part of that agreement, you could provide them with copies of the state-specific labor posters that are required. And show that they've received those. So if the issue comes up, you can show that, yes, they are aware of this specific state requirement. So that's what I would, so the answer to the question is, I don't know, but in abundance of caution, that's what I would do.
Hey, Shannon, I don't know what your schedule is. Do you have the flexibility to remain on for a little bit if people want to stay?
I do.
Okay. Next question, Julia.
Fabulous. This is a three-parter, so bear with me. So as an employer, are we only obligated to withhold tax for a state with reciprocity or all states? So if we have a remote employee working in California, are we obligated to withhold? And what about an unemployment tax?
Yeah. So on the whole California question, um,
Make sure you do those employees out of California.
well, they have a really high income tax rate for one. Um, and whether or not you have to withhold, I can, without looking, I can almost tell you the answer to that is yes. But theoretically, you would look, and the states really do. Many of their websites are miserable, but their website, when it comes to providing you information about withholding on your employees, is pretty good. And California's website is pretty good, period. So yeah, from a tax point of view, I don't know why anybody would live in California, because the income tax is around 10.5%, 11%. Woo, baby, ours is 5. But yeah, more likely than not, you have to withhold. But you would need to look at, you would need to look at California. Oh, unemployment. Unemployment is localized. So wherever the PEEP is, that's to whom you pay the unemployment insurance. So you will have to register in California for both income tax withholding and unemployment insurance. And when you register for income tax withholding, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think California is going to say, hey, how about our income tax for your business? Now you owe our income tax for your business. That's what the other tax consideration slide was about.
The next question is, what happens if someone works from another country for more than 6 months? They should not be liable for any state tax? Question mark.
I don't know. I simply don't know. I would have to. I'd have to look at that.
Julia, is it the individual or is it the company?
I think it's an individual.
Okay. Not that I know the answer of the other one either, but I just wanted to clarify the question.
So I'm thinking they're going to owe income tax to the state in which they worked in this country for the period of time they worked there. Or heaven forbid, if you're a New York-based employee, for the whole year. So and I can't guess at these things, guys, and I can't tell you the answer based on my common sense, because state law doesn't work that way. I really have to look, but common sense would tell us, based on what we saw before, that you would withhold for the state in which they were until they left.
Are employers legally required or obligated to advise Kentucky employees about the possibility of filing for a refund with Louisville Jefferson County Revenue Commission?
Legally required, Shannon?
Not that I know of. And I mean, here's the thing that strikes me is, and this is so lawyer-like, right? I don't want to be giving tax advice to my employees. If they ask me the question, I can certainly say, I believe that you can request a refund. You'll need to go talk to, look online or whatever. But I hesitate to say you need to tell every single employee that, because again, I don't want my employers giving their individual employees tax advice. So
good point.
Are there any services? Oh, sorry,
well,
I jumped the gun there.
In the event that you do tell them, they do ask, and you do tell them, I think you should consult with your tax advisor. I can't give you tax advice. But you should know that if you don't pay, if you file a refund claim in Louisville, Lexington's going to find out, wherever you live.
Are there any services you recommend that help employers file for local and state payroll accounts and keep track of them?
Say it again, Julia.
Are there any services you recommend that help employers file for local and state payroll accounts and keep track of them?
I think that answer is yes. I mean, there are a lot of third-party payroll services.
Right.
the extent to which they are proactive and would help you recognize when you need to withhold in a certain state, I don't think you could count on them for that. You have to tell them, you have to provide them that input. But then in terms of knowing the rates, knowing the jurisdictions, whether there's locals, they would know that stuff and be able to help with that.
We have a New Mexico resident working from home sometimes with a Colorado employer. Do we need workers' comp in each state?
No, just in New Mexico. And if they're working in New Mexico, you need it in New Mexico.
Right.
If they're going back and forth, probably need it in both places. I don't know the answer to that, but wherever they, yeah. I don't know the answer to that, Shannon. And if they're working in both places,
I think it's going to depend on the. I think it's going to depend on what the carrier requires, number one, and then what the state requires. So the carrier may say, we're not going to cover anyone that is working remotely that you don't have control of. And so in that instance, you would, from a practical position, want to have a policy that covers New Mexico. If New Mexico requires you to have it anyway, then obviously you do it. But New Mexico may say, we will recognize your out-of-state workers' comp since that's where the person reports. So again, it's kind of it's a fact-specific situation.
Yeah. Julia, was the question about workers' comp, or unemployment?
Workers' comp.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Disregard what I said. Okay.
Okay. Don't local Kentucky taxing authorities demand withholding based upon physical presence? Seems that work from home will complicate that tax compliance.
Yes, 100%. And yes, and so, you know, like I said, we all thought it was good news at the beginning of the pandemic when Lexington and Louisville said, just sit still, Lexington especially, just stay where you are, don't change it unless this becomes something other than temporary, which ask yourself now whether it is. And especially if you're going to allow your employees to work remotely. So the answer is yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Erica. I was going to say, now remember our polling question where we had a whole bunch of people say, oh, we're going to do this hybrid. We're going to allow people to work from home as well as, on site. Well, that's rolling into this tax question, which is, okay, my location is Louisville, Metro Louisville is where my location is, but I work in Bullitt County. I work in, I live in Bullitt County. I live in Henry County. So, that's part of that administrative bandwidth. Do you really care?
How do we tax when an employee works a few days at home and a few days at home and a few days in the office, different states and locals?
Yeah, very carefully. It's exactly what Shannon just said. I think you have to, especially if it's a local issue, you're going to have. So Dean Dorton, I work sometimes in Louisville. I have to tell Dean Dorton when I'm in Louisville. They withhold Louisville when I'm in Louisville. They hold Lexington when I'm in Lexington. If our audit team is in Moorhead, they withhold Moorhead. On the Pass the Aspirin slide was, how do I even keep up with that? Back to where the heck are my employees? Most payroll systems aren't set up for that kind of tracking. It's expensive, it's hard, but it would be what the law requires. Same with the states.
Can your work at home policy limit the location of the employee's home location?
Yeah, I think it can. And here's so that this goes back to somebody moved to Iowa, right? Or I live in Kentucky. During the pandemic, I decided to go out of state to take care of my parents in Florida. And so I'm just going to stay there. I think that you could say, remember, it's for your benefit. It's not for the employee's benefit. It's you're allowing them to do it. So yeah, you could say, you can work remotely as long as you remain located in Kentucky or Indiana. I know a lot of people do I'm going to go the ski chalet or the mountain cabin. And the issue with that obviously is it's usually the people that are way high up that have ski chalets and mountain cabins that want to go do that. And so you're not going to tell them, no, you can't do that. But, I think for the general purposes of having a remote working policy and agreement, you can limit where the person is working.
If your policy requires a certain number of days of physical presence in the main location, can the employer withhold at that workstation and then leave the remedy at the employee level?
No. Not from the tax.
Okay.
I was going to say, that was okay, good.
Great. Let me go back.
See, I told you this is why people don't like me, Shannon.
They love you, Erica. Come on.
Because I just give really hard answers. And by the way, y'all, when you do your evaluations, I'm very sensitive. Okay, go ahead, Julia.
What about an unemployment tax? And with local occupational taxes like Indiana, local tax based on departmental notice number 1. Now, there's a lot of sentences about this.
Yeah, whoever said that in, email that to me, please. I'm ehorn@deandorton.com. So I can make sure we're on the same page.
I'm trying to think. I think there's another question. How will the employer know what to withhold if reporting on the number of days remote or on-site are after the fact?
Hang on a second, Julia. Yes, you don't have to hang on. The polling questions are over. So you got your full credit with that last polling question I asked. Thank you for asking that. We did this is optional, just if you wanted to hang out, not required by any stretch. Okay, Julia, try me again.
How will the employer know what to withhold if reporting on the number of days remote or on-site are after the fact?
Yeah, well, you won't. You won't. And the employee will be real surprised. But that's why now that's what Shannon said earlier, as you contemplate these policies, if they're becoming permanent policies, that's something that you need to ascertain how you're going to accomplish, which is where are they when.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. We'll give it another minute in case you did ask a question. Please resend it, or if you have a question. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. Everyone will receive a copy of the slides and this recording later this week, so it will be available to be watched again and again and again, I'm sure.
Let's hope.
It'll be the hot bingeable item of the season.
Yeah. Well, and remember too, the polling questions won't work if you watch it. Other than that, you're fine.
Yes. Only people who attended live can qualify for CPE or CLE. We're still in the process of getting application approval for CLE. So once we get that number, we will make sure to email that out to everybody. But for those for CPE, we'll send out the survey and you can respond to that question there. I do see we got one last Q&A. Oh, never mind. Y'all are a great team doing this. Thank you. That was it. So thank you to everyone for staying on. We appreciate it. Yes, of course, Erica.
I saw a question pop up. It said something about, how does small business bear this burden? I think that's an excellent question. And I'll end with this. With regard to all, other than thank you all very much, and thank you, Shannon.
Yes.
With every decision in your business, and tax is no different, you have to measure the risk with the cost. And so if you're a small business, one thing, to Shannon's point in the question earlier, perhaps you limit the number, perhaps you do limit where your employees can go remotely, because you can't take that administrative burden. As Shannon said, you don't have that bandwidth. And then you have to think, well, the problem with your remote employees and income tax withholding is they're going to do their resident return and it's going to show a tax due. And when they look at their W-2, there's not going to be any withholding, right? So suddenly they're going to be out of pocket. You're going to have an unhappy employee. Employees are hard to get these days, as we know. Many of you are probably looking. So it's a real balancing act. And I do think that in the United States, the state and local tax burden on business has become obnoxiously too high. So thank you all. Julia, thank you for all your work.
Did you see the one last question? Did you see the last question about state unemployment is paid to the state where the physical work is done?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. This is fabulous. This is wonderful for everyone who attended. Thank you for staying with us to do all these extra questions. All the contact information is on the slide right here. You can reach out at any time. But Erica, Shannon, thank you so much. And we hope to see you at another Dean Dorton or Stites Harbison event soon. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.